Hello, welcome back to another reaction. Yeah, so today I'll be reacting to a slavery video, which is an untold story of slavery. Yeah, I'll check it out. Yeah, I think the history of black trade. But you see, when it comes to issue of slavery, it's a sensitive issue. To me, it's like bringing the past to the future. But there's one shocking thing that says slavery is still going on today, apart from this human trafficking and all of that. But I don't know if even though it is happening, I don't know but you know, sometimes a movie, you know, I don't even like watching them. But there are some lessons I watch in these movies about maybe their trust in God, how God rescued them, and it's actually something to watch. Yeah, so that you could, you know, understand the heart of men and how to build your self-confidence and your self-worth in this world you're living in. The world is not for everyone, the world is for us all. Anyway, without wasting much time, let's go check the untold story of slavery out and see what we didn't know about before that they want to tell us, let us know. So let's go check it out. What they hold for us. Black rednecks and white laborers. Untold facts about slavery. Okay.
The instrumental use of the history of slavery today also underlies the claim that slavery grew out of racism. For most of its long history, which includes most of the history of the human race, slavery was largely not the enslavement of racially different people, for the simple reason that only in recent centuries has either the technology or the wealth existed to go to another continent to get slaves and transport them en masse across an ocean. People were enslaved because they were vulnerable, not because of how they looked. The peoples of the Balkans were enslaved by fellow Europeans, as well as by the peoples of the Middle East, for at least 6 centuries before the first African was brought to the Western Hemisphere. Before the modern era, by and large, Europeans enslaved other Europeans, Asians enslaved other Asians, Africans enslaved other Africans, and the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere enslaved other indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Slavery was not based on race, much less on theories about race. Only relatively late in history did enslavement across racial lines occur on such a scale as to promote an ideology of racism that outlasted the institution of slavery itself. Wherever a separate people were enslaved, they were disdained or despised, whether they were different by country, religion, caste, race, or tribe. In East Africa, the Maasai were feared slave raiders, and other African tribes, either alone or in conjunction with Arabs, enslaved their more vulnerable neighbors. As late as 1891, it was reported that Manyuema slavers had demoralized surrounding tribes, destroying crops, and famine reigned everywhere. Even in the early 20th century, Abyssinians were still raiding other Africans and carrying off slaves. It was 1922 before the British had gained sufficient control in Tanganyika to stamp out slavery there. Arabs were the leading slave raiders in East Africa, ranging over an area larger than all of Europe. The total number of slaves exported from East Africa during the 19th century has been estimated to be at least 2 million. The form in which the story of slavery has reached most people today has been along the lines of the best-selling book and widely watched television miniseries Roots by Alex Haley. Challenged on the historical accuracy of Roots, Haley said, "I tried to give my people a myth to live by." This instrumental use of history, or purported history, is open to the same objections as other instrumental myth-making. Despite the impression created by Roots, during the era of the massive slave trade from West Africa, a white man was more likely to catch malaria in Africa than to catch slaves himself. The average life expectancy of a white man in the interior of sub-Saharan Africa at that time was less than 1 year. By and large, men from Europe or the Western Hemisphere came to the coasts of Africa bought their slaves, and left as soon as possible. Even so, the death rates among the white crews of the ships carrying slaves to the Western Hemisphere were as high as the death rates among the slaves themselves.
Wow.
It was only much later, after quinine and other medical measures enabled Europeans to survive where there were tropical diseases, was it possible for them to invade Africa in force and establish empires there. But by then, the Atlantic slave trade had already been ended. During the era of that trade, Africa was largely ruled by Africans, who established the conditions under which slave sales took place. The crew of a slave ship was in no position to defy African rulers and their armies by going out across the land and capturing people willy-nilly. The stronger African peoples captured and enslaved the weaker peoples, the same pattern found over the centuries in Europe, Asia, the Western Hemisphere, and Polynesia. In Nyasaland, the Ngoni and Yao swaggered over and terrorized other tribes. In Uganda, the Baganda made life miserable for their neighbors. And the Nyoro and Hima of Anko enslaved Toro women and children. The Tutsi dominated the Hutu in Rwanda, the Maasai lorded it over the Kikuyu and Kamba, and the latter, in turn, held the Indorobo in a kind of serfdom. It was precisely the fact that Europeans, except for the Portuguese, seldom participated in the raids that captured and enslaved Africans that enabled most people in Europe and the Americas to remain oblivious to the traumatic experience that this was, with some Africans committing suicide to avoid capture and wives being whipped as they tried to cling to their husbands or children. Historian David Breon Davis pointed out that Europeans had little contact with the actual process of enslavement, and that as late as 1721, the Royal African Company asked its agents to investigate the modes of enslavement in the interior. Europeans typically saw only the end results, enslaved people being offered for sale on the coast. It was much the same story in the Ottoman Empire, where those who bought slaves had no idea what these slaves had been through before. The unique position of the Western world in the history, and especially the destruction of slavery, need not imply that there was unanimity within the West on this institution. In addition to whites who defended the enslavement of Africans on racial grounds, or who opposed general emancipation on social grounds, there were many whites, and even blacks, who defended slavery as a matter of self-interest as slave owners. Although most black owners of slaves in the United States were only nominal owners of members of their own families, there were thousands of other blacks in the antebellum South who were commercial slave owners, just like their white counterparts. An estimated 1/3 of the free persons of color in New Orleans were slave owners, and thousands of these slave owners volunteered to fight for the Confederacy during the Civil War. Black slave owners were even more common in the Caribbean. In short, there were many defenders of slavery in the West, even in the 19th century. And outside the West, slavery was too widely accepted to require defense. No other nation ended slavery in the same way as the United States did, and few ended it after so short a struggle, as history is measured. How and why did slavery end in most of the world? There were two major processes. Over the centuries, as more and more territories around the world consolidated into nation-states with their own armies and navies, raiding those territories to capture and enslave the people who lived within them became more hazardous in itself, and also risked military retaliation against the countries from which the raiders came. Thus, more and more peoples became off-limits to slave raiders over time. Put differently, the areas which remained subject to slave raiding over the centuries were primarily those where the people lived in smaller or weaker societies. Such societies continued to exist where it was difficult, for geographic or other reasons, to consolidate large areas under one government. This was true of the Balkans, the backwaters of Asia, and much of sub-Saharan Africa. By the early modern era, sub-Saharan Africa, with its numerous and severe geographic handicaps, was one of the last remaining areas from which vast numbers of people could be enslaved.
Wow. Wow. This is actually deep, yeah. don't say much on this because it's a sensitive matter. I just learned 2 or 3 things from this video to the now. Number one, he pointed out and said slavery is not because it's not as if it's out of hate for one's races or the other person's race that made others to enslave the other person. It's because the ones that are being enslaved are vulnerable. But then, let's come up with vulnerability. I think vulnerability just simply means being weak, being too weak not to take up responsibility for yourself, or maybe to fight for yourself. Yeah, these 5 fingers are not equal, you know. Some are bigger than taller, you know, bigger than others. So, you know, in this world we have more weak people and those that are strong, even bodily, and so with the mind. So, and human nature, they want to take control, take charge, and oppress. So they take advantage of those that are vulnerable, who don't have defense anywhere else. The picture broke my heart. Imagine a father being separated from his beloved family, a child he will never see again, a wife he might not be able to see again, he might even die in his community. Just like that, you're living happily with your wife and your children. Just like that, some forces came from nowhere. Fellow humans like you think they are more powerful than you, and they just drag you off, and you do it. You can't, even no matter how you resist, you try to resist them, they will surely overpower you. And what are they trying to achieve? They will force a man to come and work for them. What is the level of separation? They will take you off from your husband or from your wife or from your children and force you to come and stay in their home and take care of their own household. And there is something about slavery that is so painful. Whatever you do, you don't hold anything. Nothing comes to you. However hard you work, you are working for the person who forced you. What about Israelites in the olden days where Pharaoh enslaved them Asia to Africa? You don't own anything. Whatever thing you do for your master. Oh Jesus. People have gone through hardship and wicked times in history. And you know what? People should appreciate God that in our generation, in our time, you and I are not experiencing this. We are not born in that time. But whether we like it or not, the issue of slavery cannot be overemphasized and it cannot be overlooked or underlooked. It is not possible. It is wickedness to suppress your fellow human by force to do things for you. And one of the most painful things that I say suppresses most persons that fought for the slavery to be over. They fought in their own interest again. How can a black man own a slave when they are trying to free other black men from slavery? See the wickedness of men. Sometimes I just wonder, look at the right way to go here, but the man chooses to go the wrong way. I mean, is he a human being? One more point. They say most of the slave masters, when they get their slave, they don't even know what the slave has gone through. As a slave, your feeling and your emotions are not even considered. Wow. Yeah, they've been tormented. Anyway, I'm not going to look at the pain of it. But I want to say kudos to the United States of America. To Abraham Lincoln. I've watched so many videos, several videos on slavery, movies. They're all out there for us to watch. Sometimes when you watch these things, you develop bitterness and hate. But no. You don't need to have bitterness and hate. Yeah, it happened to our ancestors, it happened to us, we know. But most persons that did these things, they've all gone. Just few handful of them are remaining right now. You don't have to, unless you have been treated. It is time for you to stand for yourself, not to hate, but to take charge, to take control of it. We are taking control. Not for you to be vulnerable anymore, to be strong. That's all you need to do, because the major point of slavery, the weak point there, that a man can enslave you, is when you are weak in mind, you are vulnerable. So the only thing to do to stop slavery is to scale high, step up your game. then you can escape slavery. Both in the physical realm, in the hands of human, in the hands of demons, or in the hands of sin. As a human being, whatever thing that you're addicted to, you are a slave to that thing. So the only thing you need to do is to step up your mentality, renew your mentality. If you want to renew your mentality in God, step up in reading of His Word, and His nature will come to you. If you want to break free from addiction, masturbation, whatsoever, step up your mentality and see the violence is given to you. If you want to break from alcoholism, know how your life is becoming useless, and then try by all means to step your mentality so you're not vulnerable and weak, so that you don't become powerful than you. So the only way to break free from slavery, because if you are hating the white people or whosoever that they are not that put you in slavery when you're hitting them, then you are still being enslaved by them. They are still controlling your mind. But by the time you step up your game and renew your mentality and step up higher and stop being vulnerable, then you have won the victory, total victory over whoever you are hating. It's all about power. Take charge of your life and don't be a slave to anything. Yeah, talking about malaria. We Africans are into malaria. The medication is all around. Even right now I'm having malaria, but it has become a normal part of our lives that during a season like this, we actually have malaria. But we thank God for the vaccines, yeah, that we made available. And we thank God for the way the world has, has come to this stage. I will thank those that stood their ground and fought for the slavery that ends and abolished such wickedness that was going on there. And we thank those, the heroes past, that lost their lives for the fight of freedom against slavery. Thank you. If not for you, I don't know what this game would have turned out to be. But let me tell you something, that no matter how the wickedness of men are growing, the goodness of men are also growing. So we'll look at the good and make it increase more. However, the people out there, we also have good people. So do not lose hope. There is freedom, and you can be freedom from anything. Anyway, the video is quite long, so I won't be going further and talking. This is the most you can take. Let's just check it out here. Of course, there are so many opinions about slavery, but it's an issue people are actually living in the past, and it's good. Living in the past and focus on developing yourself, making yourself stronger instead of looking backward and looking at these things. Yeah, stop being vulnerable. Develop a strong mental ability. Right. I will see you in the next video. Remain the best version of yourself as much as you can be. Subscribe and comment, and also do not forget to click the notification button so you can get notification all the time. You're getting better. You're getting better on the reaction as time goes on. Yeah, you're getting better. I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Thank you.